All right, guys, it's time for the Next Level Guy Show, a men's interview, interest, and improvement-focused podcast featuring interviews with the greats from all industries to help you better your life. Each week, a new episode features an interview with one of the greats, covering all aspects of their story, from life hacks to tips and protocols that have allowed them to live life on the next level. We then highlight concrete action steps that you can use to improve your life. And now, your host, Ian Dawson-Mackay.
Most people think history is just dates and battles, but it's the personal stories that make it real. I wanted to create something where you don't just learn about history, you experience it. Whether it's marching in Napoleon's army, standing in a Viking shield wall, or surviving in a World War II tank, Survive History is all about putting you in the moment. And that's a quote from Louee Dessent-Jackson. And that's our guest today. He's a multi-talented producer, presenter and writer who's taken the digital world by storm. Known for his captivating storytelling and passion for the past, Louie brings history to life on his YouTube channel, Survive History. Whether it's uncovering forgotten tales or reimagining iconic events, Louie's work blends creativity with a unique perspective that keeps audiences hooked. Get ready to dive into the mind of a true storyteller and discover the secrets behind creating engaging, thought-provoking and badass content. This is an episode you just won't want to miss. And now, let's get to the interview. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's an absolute honour to feature somebody who I'm a major fan of your show. But for people who don't know you, could you give a quick explanation? Like, say, imagine we're between lifts going up a floor. How would you describe what you do?
Well, thanks, Ian, for having me on the show. I think Survive History, the core idea behind it is that when you click onto one of our episodes, you are transported back to a period of history. You follow in the footsteps of a soldier, a sailor, someone who's doing sort of dangerous or daring jobs from that time, and you get to experience what their life might have been like. It's not too serious. There are touches of humor along the way, but we do try and make them, with our fairly small budgets, as epic as we possibly can.
And you certainly do that, because I love like old military empire and historical document, and it's like a wet dream for a fan. Your show, it's because you go deep diving in, you immerse yourself in, and you show both sides, and you link it in with historical sources. You include so much depth into it. But what was that deep dive for you into history? Because with a name like yours, it sounds like you're a historical adventurer. Was it always for you, history?
Yeah, I've always loved history since I was a kid. Even at school, when it wasn't particularly cool to admit that you loved a subject, I really loved history. I loved going on field trips to historical locations. I think I've always had the knack of being able to use my imagination when it comes to history. And if you go to somewhere that many people might see as some dry, dusty old rocks, I've generally tended to find those places really interesting. So yeah, I think all the way through school, and then into sort of the teenage years, there were some really good shows on TV at that point. There were things like Battlefield Britain and Time Commanders, which are kind of cult shows from that era that sort of made it fun. And then also through gaming as well. I love the kind of Total War games, Age of Empires. So I got into it through that as well. And then I went on to study it, 5 years undergrad and masters doing Roman history. So yeah, I have loved it from as long as I can remember, basically.
And was there a historical moment that you think that inspired you as a kid? You know, when you were looking back, was it the likes of Caesar, Napoleon? Was there a certain period that kind of ignited that wee Louie's desire to study it and to get into it?
So I think it would probably be films. So the most obvious one I can think of is Gladiator. That was a film. That was a film that came out when I was about 9 or 10, and I was too young to watch it, but did, and thought it was amazing. And sounds a bit cliche that would be the reason that you go into studying ancient history, but that was certainly a key factor. And there were there were lots of great series and films and games, as I mentioned at that time, that really inspired me. So I don't think there was a specific moment that sparked my interest. I mean, I have to kind of thank my parents for indulging my interest and taking me to places that I wanted to visit and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was always there, really.
Because that sounds ideal to me. I mean, I was over in Greece, Cyprus, and seen some of the ruins from the Roman Empire, and like you admire the intelligence and the logistics of like just getting water from seas into inland for them, and how they built stuff like previous structures from prehistoric ages and stuff. It's truly inspiring. But does it scare you that a lot of people get their understanding of history now from video games and like the likes of, I don't know, like Game of Thrones and things like that? That people are not got that kind of teachings of history that we used to have as kids?
No, I don't think so. I think anything that actually brings you into the topic and makes you want to find out more about it is absolutely fine. I think series like Game of Thrones. I'm trying to think of other series that I've watched recently that are absolutely historically inaccurate but fantastic. I actually watched Gladiator 2 this week, which was really entertaining, absolutely, completely bonkers and not historical. But if you're a kid watching that, I'm sure that you are going to go and well, maybe not read, but perhaps Google about the Roman Empire and try and find out more. And yeah, there's certainly nothing wrong with that.
Because that's something I did find was like there's a lot more podcasts now based on it, and a lot more people are kind of getting interested by playing it on Assassin's Creed. And I was just double checking on my phone there. There's one called Echoes of History, where the guy talks about history based on the Assassin's Creed legacy. And I like that idea of, okay, we're going to pull you in and we're going to educate you on it. But how did you go then from reading about it and understanding it to living it to showcasing it and educating us on it? How did you go, in a long way of saying, how did you start the channel? What was the inspiration from just being the academic to being the creator?
So I was working in news for quite a long time, and the thing that I sort of developed an expertise in, not necessarily deliberately, but just it was the way that my career went, was in YouTube. And eventually a job opportunity came up at a company called History Hit, where they wanted a social media manager. And the combination of my expertise in YouTube and history was my first taste of actually creating history documentaries. I'd done quite a lot of video editing and producing by that point, but actually kind of combining those two passions, I was able to learn quite a lot from doing that. And I think the thing that probably surprised me the most was just how popular history content was online and among young people as well. And so, I mean, the channel itself came about during a period of some adversity for me, because I actually was made redundant from my job, we were about to move house, and I had my first child on the way. So probably not the obvious time to start a YouTube channel. But I had about 2 months where I was searching around for jobs and had this incredible drive and this basically desire to do a lot of things that I'd kind of thought would be a good idea throughout the first 7 or 8 years of my career, but I'd never got around to. So things like, creating your own website, marketing yourself, those type of things that, you probably should do if you're in this kind of business, but can sort of seem quite low priority. And the channel, because I had some quite good contacts through the work I'd done in making history documentaries already, particularly in the reenactment world, I saw an opportunity to create a channel that was this fully immersive but fun documentary channel, and I knew that it could be done with a very small number of people, and it just so happened that at the time the Napoleon film, the Ridley Scott kind of biopic, was on the horizon. It was coming out sort of in a few months' time, and I thought, I kind of took a gamble and thought people are going to be really interested in this topic. We've already mentioned the crossover between popular culture and history, and that being a way that gets people into it. Yeah. So that was my punt, making a full-length documentary on the life of a soldier in Napoleon's army, and it worked. It was instantly popular. And for a new channel, or a first video on a new channel, to gain now over 1 million views, that's not an easy thing to do, because I've set up various channels before where that's not happened. Believe me. So I knew that I was on to something with this format.
Because when you look at your stats, you can understand it, because it's like every little boy's dream to play soldiers and be these historical figures. And I remember one of the comments, you put up a thing about, say, could you be a rifleman in the cavalry army? And somebody immediately put, no, I couldn't. It's just like, we all imagine we could be these great warriors and we could do these amazing things. But when you see the scale of it, and to see the small amount of people that's involved in your channel, I expected like tons of experienced guys, producers. I expected light show, because the quality, the depth, the realism, the focus, and the widespread of how much you entertain as much as educate is amazing. And I love your show. And like I was saying to you before we started, I would love more and more episodes, but I know to do that, you have to put an amazing amount of quality into it, and you should be super proud of what you've done so far. But how do you find that role between becoming the creator and not the viewer? How did you overcome that initial fear of jumping in at such a difficult time for you personally?
That's a good question, because obviously, particularly when you're starting a new channel, that first video that you release is quite a sort of step into the unknown. I mean, I'd done quite a bit of presenting before, but I hadn't really presented much on my own before that point. So it was a leap of faith. I think what set it up quite nicely, that first episode, was that I'd had quite a lot of time to research it. So, having no job was brilliant for reading about Napoleon's army and the sort of the life of the soldier. So I probably put more research into that episode and ended up not using 80% of the sort of cool facts that I'd learned. So yeah, a lot of research, a lot of thought went into the script, and I knew the guys that I was going to be working with, who the sort of the reenactment group that we collaborated with there really knew their stuff, and had some kind of genuine bona fide historians among their ranks. So we knew it was going to be an interesting episode. We knew it had a chance to be successful because people would be searching for the topic. But still, I think anyone who posts on social media will know on day one, if you've got, a handful of views, you are, it's a sort of heart and mouth moment. You're like, was this a good idea? Should I pull it? And then luckily, with that one, the algorithm sort of took over, and within a few days, it was flying. But yeah, it's definitely hard. Hard for anyone, I think.
Because it's amazing to think that was your first main, your main video, the one that got you. Because when you watch that video, you're like, the level of research and dedication that's gone into it. Because in your videos, you have the reenactment societies, you interview people from both sides of the army, and you go through the dress, the diet, their attitudes, the politics, the weaponry, just anything and everything. And it's such a joy because you find that you just consume, but you learn as you go. But how did you say that to your wife? How do you explain, I know I should be looking for a job, but I'm going to go down and meet a bunch of guys dressed up as Romans. Was there that pushback? Say if somebody's listening just now and wants to make their own channel and they're in a similar position or a 9-to-5, what do you think is holding people back from entering the YouTube world, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, it's really funny you asked that because so the day after I was made redundant, we'd had a holiday booked, and we actually flew to Portugal, and it was the weirdest holiday because we were in this lovely location, and yeah, obviously the conversation was dominated by the fact that I just lost my job, and one lunchtime I went off. I think I went to the gym, and I came back and saw my wife, and I said, "You know what? I think I'm gonna create my own channel. Having just worked on other people's YouTube channels for the last 6 or 7 years or whatever it was, I'm going to create my own." And she, my wife, sort of looked down at her pregnant belly and said, "Is now really the time?" And I was like, "Yes, it's got to be. It's got to be now." And there was a big element of sort of chance about it because, yes, it was a tough situation, but it was also probably the only opportunity and the only point in my life where I was going to have a couple of months to do this myself. And I managed to actually film 2 episodes in the couple of months before my son was born, so that essentially I had the material to sort of come back later to make them, because obviously, for anyone who's had kids, they know that the first couple of months you can't really sort of spend much time editing videos. But I guess what I would say to people, first of all, is that those moments where things seem to be working against you, it's a cliche, but it can be a big opportunity because it forces you to think inward and forces you to really sort of take stock of what you want to do next, which is very hard to do when you are doing a sort of 9-to-5 regularly. But also, I suppose the other thing that I would say for anyone wanting to start a YouTube channel is one of the big barriers to people publishing video is that they worry that everyone they know is going to be scrutinizing it. The reality is that most people, in the nicest way, don't care that you've posted a YouTube video.
Yep.
They might care if it becomes, successful. And they might say, at Christmas, they might say, that's really cool. But generally speaking, they've got their own stuff going on. They don't actually care that you've posted a YouTube video, and that is freeing in the sense that you haven't really got much to lose. So with that kind of barrier overcome, it becomes less important whether your first video, gets a 10 views or 10 million views, because once you disregard the idea that you're going to be judged, you can kind of get to learning from your kind of posts, and that's essentially how most channels develop and succeed.
Because I honestly 100% am a major fan of your show, and what I love is that because I know a lot about history and because of my own sort of passion for it, I know how authentic and true your content is. But the problem with history is it happens a long time ago, and you've done from Vikings to soldiers from the World War to Romans, and how should we look at historical information? Because a lot of times people say history is written by the winners, but everybody nowadays, the Trump fans about fake news and all this kind of nonsense. How can we judge like the sources? How can we know what we're looking at? Because if history is written by the winners, a lot of times they obviously put themselves in the best light. But would you agree with that statement, or how could we gauge truth in that in historical sources?
So I think you, as a historian, part of the training is to recognize that so many factors have influenced the way that a primary source is written. So you should never take a primary source at face value, because the person who's written it will always have a bias. They'll always be writing in a context that is completely different to the context in which you are reading it. And there are always going to be references and nuances to what they've written that are lost, and you probably aren't going to be able to understand. But you can kind of make interpretations once you have considered all of those different things. You try and approach it and achieve that balance. But ultimately, no one who is a consumer of history wants someone to sit on the fence about everything. Once you've kind of considered that evidence and you've used your training in that way, you then need to form your own opinion on it. Otherwise, it's kind of it's meaningless. You're just kind of presenting a list of problems with the evidence. So I certainly try to be balanced. I mean, it's funny that you bring up the idea of sort of fake news, and there is this trend in history that history, like everything else, is getting dragged into the culture wars a little bit, which is fascinating in some ways and quite depressing in other ways, because history is all about nuance, and as soon as you kind of forget that and lose it, you are essentially just trying to use a historical narrative to suit something that you want to achieve today. So I certainly, I think with my channel, I try as best as I can to stay away from that, to kind of be quite confident in the arguments I make, and obviously there are times where I know that I've got certain things wrong, but generally speaking, the research is there, and I think when I write my scripts, I'm quite careful that each line is written in such a way that it is defendable, because YouTube is a place where you'll be quickly corrected if you make a big mistake.
Because that's what I used to hate when I would go onto like Twitter and people would be arguing about things and their sources were a .com or a .co.uk, and you're like, no, that's not how we look at, and because like I'd worked in a university and people were just believing what they would see, or they would be like how the media were the soul-sucking demons of the world, and you're like, you could argue that the media intervention helped the war effort by showcasing it in a positive light, and they helped in World War II, etc. But suddenly it's this thing of, well, they say bad things about the people I like, they must be bad. And I think people have kind of forgotten how to analyze a source, understand a source, and actually not just pick one that celebrates what you want it to say. And it really does bug me, but as a whole podcast on its own, to be honest. When you're doing your videos, why did you not go for the likes of like Napoleon, Caesar, like the main historical figures? Why did you go sort of the deep dive into the sharpshooter or the Roman front, legionary? Was it that kind of thing of you wondered about their life, so you want to showcase the beauty, the disgust, mayhem that these people went through back in the day?
Yeah, I think it's far more interesting a video to look at the role of the common soldier or the everyday person. When I say everyday, I do mean people doing extraordinary, dangerous jobs. That's kind of what we're looking at. But for someone like Napoleon and Caesar, there are big problems with trying to get into their exact mindset. There are so many different ways of interpreting who those people are, and I just think that looking at the rank and file and taking lots of different primary sources, so written letters, things that are a bit harder to find but are far more rewarding when you do. I think that makes for a more interesting video, and it certainly allows you to do a bit more of the practical stuff, because that's another thing with the episodes. As far as I possibly can, I try and get my hands dirty and do some of the stuff that they would have done within reason. And then there's also the fact that a lot of the living history groups we work with, they are focused on the everyday soldiers. That's who they want to portray. And yeah, I think it's certainly more of a universal experience, and it makes it easier to ask the question, could you survive as, if you are able to put yourself in that mindset and genuinely believe that if you were alive during that time period, you could actually have been asked to join Napoleon's army or fight in the English Civil War.
Because that's what I love about it. It's like you hear like letters written by people that have been found in the local area or like inscribed on tablets. And, there was one where you talked about Tom Plunkett, the sharpshooter who went up on a church roof and shot 20 soldiers and then ran off and did it again somewhere else, and who have you, from your sort of your videos, what people kind of jump out? Are there people that you have sort of blown you away by what they've done, by the sources that you've read, or are there people that stood out and you thought, I need to do more about them because of their amazing contribution to the war or that time period?
It's sometimes the guys who are nameless, other than this one piece of evidence, that fascinates me. So, for example, you might have a letter of a soldier describing an outbreak of typhus in Napoleon's camp. And the way that they describe it is just so horrific that you feel like you're there with them, and you're transported to this. This particular example I'm thinking of was during the kind of retreat from Moscow, where something like 90% of Napoleon's army didn't make it back to France. And when you go much further back in time, and when you're talking about the Romans, perhaps the only piece of evidence you'll have about someone's life is their tombstone. And that is the one connection you have. They've chosen, or someone they know has chosen, to record certain details of their life tombstone. Why have they chosen what they've chosen? What are the gaps that they're leaving out? And can we fill those gaps? So for all those reasons, the people where you find a small jigsaw piece of evidence and have to use your imagination to sort of fill in the rest of the picture are the people that interest me the most, I think.
Because that's what we noticed when we went to like Cyprus. I mean, it's just one of these sort of random things. We found a little fort, and you had the cannons and defending the seafront and all that. And then as you went in, the British had used it as a gallows in World War II, and then it had been previously used in the gallows in other times where they actually written on the wall about how they had people from the outside could see through this little crack and they could speak to each other the night of the condemned and all this sort of stuff. And it was quite amazing you start to visualize it. And I think that's the beauty about your show is you're not just reading, it's not just a textbook. You're actually showcasing it. You're in the moment. As you're doing it, we kind of follow along as the viewer, and it's like you're experiencing it too. But how do you balance between entertainment and education? How do you make sure that you don't go down the Gladiator 2 route, shall we say, of throwing animals and all sorts in that would never have existed? But how do you balance that two thing of I want the views, but I also need to educate people? That two sides of you.
Yeah, I mean, well, we don't have the budget for sharks or baboons yet.
You'll get there.
Hopefully, we'll get there. It's a really good question. So when I'm doing research for the episodes, I'm always looking for the sort of nuggets of information that I think will surprise people or change their perspective, or the perfect sort of nuggets are the ones that bust myths, for example. So when I'm writing the script, I'm trying to make sure that everything that I'm saying is going to engage people in some way. And I think once people realize that at the core of the video is quite an interesting story, and hopefully they think it's well researched, at that point, I hope that the audience sort of allows the sort of touches of humor that come into it. And the touches of humor, they generally tend to sort of be made up with me and the kind of me and my team on the day. We'll think something's funny as we're sort of filming on set, and we'll just do it. And if it works on camera, we'll keep it in. If not, we won't. But I think we've reached the stage now with the channel where we know that the audience kind of permits that little bit of fun, because they trust that the key information is there as well.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
Because it comes across of like how much fun you have, but also just the calmness you have behind the camera. Because even when you're doing riding horses, or you're fighting a Viking woman who's throwing an axe at you, you always seem to be just in that moment, and like you're a natural presenter is probably the best way of saying it. How did you build up that confidence? Because you'll hear a lot of creators say, I hate my voice, I hate how I look on camera. I mean, I look like a troll, and I got sod it. I throw myself into it. How do you find that? How did you become natural with the camera?
Well, that's not true, Ian, for a start. But so the presenting, I think, developed out of a confidence about what I was saying, a confidence that that probably comes firstly with a bit of age and an expertise and knowing your topic well. I don't think I would have felt so confident, sort of perhaps in my early 20s. And I think being true to yourself as well when you present. So I am not a YouTuber who is going to be sort of shouting at the camera and and sort of jumping up and down with excitement at things. That's not necessarily my style. My style is more almost a kind of not a dispassionate look, but someone who is my character, I guess, and the channel is someone who is bemused by the fact that they are in this bizarre situation of, let's say, fighting a duel with a Viking woman, as you say, and on the day itself, I suppose one thing that I would say is I'm kind of so focused on what we have to achieve that day, and directing people as well, because as well as presenting, I'm also sort of directing what's happening, which really kind of focuses the mind. But with that, you absolutely lose all inhibitions and a sense that or any awkwardness about what you're doing. You just kind of have to get on with it, and so that's kind of freeing. And once you've done a certain number of episodes and you realize that people are responding well to it, then that obviously gives you a sense of confidence as well.
Because you are a natural on camera. And I'm always so jealous because they come across as so professionally done, and to know of the small crew that you have and how you're trying to just get as much in as you can while you're working your 9 to 5. And it's kind of amazing for me to watch and go, bloody hell, I wish I had that. I want to do that. I want to do that. I mean, I even wanted to make a series on next level guys from history, but I mean, that's kind of been focused on. But when you're doing it, you mentioned your humor and the personal touch, and you go into speaking to the canteen lady, you go in and you look at their diet and how they would have treated themselves in the foxhole and where they would have gone to the toilet and all these sorts of things. Has a personal touch or a bit of humor kind of opened up an insight into a historical event or a person or a battle that you've gone, whoa, and it's changed your opinion of it or made you want to look into it more? It kind of intrigued you more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are many traditional history documentaries that I absolutely love, where you have academic talking heads talking over footage, talking about the big picture, but they rarely talk about where people went for a poo. It just doesn't often come up. And yet, that is, if you are the person who's transported back to sort of serve in a Sherman tank in Normandy, that's something you've got to think about on day one. Where am I going to go to the toilet? So 100%, I think looking at the kind of the everyday stuff opens up the perspectives completely. And really thinking about it in the sense of, this person in whatever century they happen to be in, they wake up, and what do they do next? And, at what point in their day do things start getting weird for us in the 21st century? At what point are they, having to sort of dig their own latrine, or at what point are they sort of hiding from snipers? And if you sort of go through that person's experience in that kind of granular way, you start to pick out the things that are like, that is something that really makes me not want to have to survive or endure that period,
Because nowadays we've got the sort of professional armies. We hope we'll never ever need to be a world war again, where you're drafted, etc. But while you're doing that, I mean, you've been in shield walls. Well, people have been charging with cavalry at you. You've been in like mock shooting drills and stuff like that. And your heart must have been racing because your brain doesn't remember you're just doing a YouTube video. You actually get into the moment. What did it teach you about dealing with, somebody that's drafted in, about dealing with fear, dealing with the cold, the damp, the being that kind of in that person to deal with those kind of things? Because, did you find a set of skills, for example, or a way of dealing emotional control, or were they literally just take the weapon off from you work on the croft with it and try to survive to live the next day? Did you find a way they taught them how to be able to deal with people throwing javelins and all that at them?
So I think I would say generally in our episodes we're always pretty safe.
Yeah.
I don't think I've done too many things that would be comparable to a sort of the actual genuine experience. I mean, probably the scariest thing that I did in an episode was riding the horse in the English Civil War video that we did with some experience, but not loads, and kind of putting on the armor and the gear that the sort of parliamentarian cavalry would wear, and then sort of doing the kind of sword drills and things like that. There was there was a little bit of a kind of an element of
when you're chopping the cabbages.
Yeah, let's say that you couldn't control everything in that situation when you're working with and Windsor, who's the horse that I was riding in that, and it sort of is the star of several episodes actually from the Worcestershire Cavalry. He's absolutely massive, that horse. He's very, very nice, very kind of very, very kind of a gentle giant, but that was a scary moment and kind of one that I was glad when we got to the end of the day that I was in one piece. But generally speaking, the hardest things that I have to do is squeezing out of the Sherman hatch was pretty hard. That took about 7 takes, I think. That was an eye-opening experience. But beyond bumping my head, I've not had too many injuries yet.
Because I loved watching that. I think it was after you cut up the cabbage a few times, doing the as you're driving past and taking the sword, the practice drill. I think it was something like, what did you say? It was like, now that we've killed a few royal vegetables, we can now do the real thing. Yeah. And I love that kind of the humor that goes into it, because you kind of realize is a lot of this life would have been drilling, sleeping, eating, shitting. It's quite amazing to look back now. How do you think you've looked at like the likes of the Romans to the Vikings to the World War? What has it kind of shown you about our changing attitudes towards war, to history, to, like now that we've gone to guns instead of just two guys twatting each other with swords? How do you think that's shaped on our opinion to war, etc.? Because we don't seem to understand it as much as seeing thousands of people on a battlefield. But are we, because of entertainment, are we now too used to seeing gunfire and that, unless you're close by?
So, I mean, I suppose what's always really interesting to me, and if we were to sort of go back to the English Civil War episode, a lot of those guys actually didn't have very much training, and they were genuinely thrown into battle with maybe a couple of drills in their pike formation, or a few days training in sort of riding together in a couple of lines of cavalry. And so in that situation, you can understand how scary it would be, and how also like not well coordinated, how shambolic it would be actually, those battles. I think that's one of the things, obviously when we do watch it in movies, it's always quite neat, the way that things come together, and everyone moves when they're ordered, and you don't necessarily get a sense of how chaotic it would have been, and how difficult things would be to control, and how people would be sort of running off without orders. It would have been a complete mess. I think that's quite an interesting thing. Um, I think, you know, if a war was to break out today, it would just be so different. I mean, you know, the sort of the rise of drones and all that kind of stuff almost, it clearly isn't yet taking away the sort of the need for sort of boots on the ground, but um, that's the direction it's heading. And I think you'd be pretty unlucky today, although it clearly does happen, but you'd be pretty unlucky today to end up in a close quarters fight of the type that would be regular, you know, during the sort of the Viking era or the Romans. I mean, I kind of think of one guy we spoke to who played his reenactment was as a royalist pikeman. You know, he was talking about the kind of the push of pike, where you have two lines of people with long spears, essentially no shield or anything defending you, and you are just pushing these spears into each other. And that, and the sort of the line infantry warfare, where all you had to do was stand and shoot at the enemy. You couldn't. There was nothing else that you could do. You know, your whole training was around standing there and taking it, and just accepting the fact that if you got hit, that was it for you. So there's all sorts of different mindsets throughout the kind of periods we cover that are in some ways understandable, because you realize that they were human and often they didn't have much training, and at the same time are impossible to imagine how you would deal with that situation.
Because you see that nowadays, don't you, about the Russian-Ukraine conflict, about how they're using drones and things. But when you watch some of your videos, you kind of get an anticipation of what it was like with two guys with axes going at each other. Or suddenly you're seeing like the military one where they were busing in like kits for the soldiers, and you know they were making them hot meals and the little meal packs and stuff. You know, and you see the difference as time's gone on of how we've got the resources better, how we've controlled it better. But you mentioned about directing, and you know you kind of want to make sure you get the shots and follow the script, etc. And you've got a natural way of speaking to people on camera where you draw out the information in an exciting and entertaining way when you're dealing with these reenactment people, because I mean you don't know what they're going to be like till you've started speaking to them. What's that taught you about building connections, leadership, you know, being the guy in charge? Because you've gone from kind of reading the news to creating the news from history. What's it taught you about being the person in charge and now also being the businessman side of things as well as the creator?
So, I mean, with the channel, we're so lucky in the sense that the groups we work with, they want to be there. They want to help us. They want to sort of create the best episode that they can. And that makes things a lot easier. Communication in those situations is difficult, particularly when you reach sort of sizes of maybe 40 people or so. That's probably the most we've worked with on the Hastings episode. And when it gets to that size, you know, it's quite difficult to direct as a single person. And you almost need the groups we work with to sort of use their own hierarchy. This is a kind of an interesting factor of these living history groups. You know, if they play a military unit, they tend to have a leader and a sort of hierarchy that really works for us when we're working with the groups, because you know we can sort of explain what we're trying to achieve with a shot, and that will go down the chain of command with the groups and kind of come together. But ultimately, it's about trying to convince people that you have their best interests at heart, and that once you achieve these shots, everyone's going to get something out of it. So I think we hope that the groups we work with gain the exposure from being in our episodes, and they get the chance to appear on camera in a way that's edited to make everyone sort of look good. I mean, we want to create a product where we're never going to achieve sort of Hollywood levels of production, but we want to create something that's really well produced. And so I suppose that's an opportunity for everyone involved.
Because it definitely comes across that in the video of how you go out your way of showcasing everything. You don't make you don't go, oh, she's just a lady serving food, running the kitchen. You go in and find out about her and her experience and what she would what she's learned from being part of the reenactment. So you give everybody this sort of shining light to let them be the star when you're talking to them, etc. What would you say to people who wanted to get involved in that or learn more about the history? Where would be the first place? How do we find like reenactment societies? Is it Googling, or is there a list somewhere? Or how can we become more involved in discovering our own history so we can learn our history for a better future?
I mean, so what I'd say first of all is you probably need to have a real passion for a particular time period, because it is a big commitment. Sorry, that's my alarm. It is a big commitment to be part of one of these groups. I mean, the guys and girls who join them often are part of many different groups. They're not necessarily committed to one specific unit or whatever it happens to be. But once you kind of know what that group is, my advice is probably to go to living history festivals and speak to them, because ultimately, as well as the historical side of this, a lot of people go into it, I think, for the social side. If you're committed to a group, it tends to be a lot of weekends that these guys do events over the summer. It is something that they do for the love of it. But what I would say is, reenactment and watching living history displays, when I was really young, they were another thing that really engaged me. And as a very young kid, my mum tells me that at places like the WWII Viking Centre, I would be asking the guy dressed as a Viking just, as many questions as I could until I sort of bored the pants off him. And I think there is a level of connection when someone, it looks like they're from the time period that you don't gain in other ways. But and also, I think the living history community, if you can call it that, would agree when they say that generally speaking, there are quite a lot of older people in these groups, and some struggle to bring in younger people. That's not the case. That's not the case for all of them. And again, we've worked with a real mixture. But I hope with our videos that we can at least highlight to people that this is a way of engaging with history. If you're really into it, and it can be really fun, really social, and
it does look great fun.
Yeah.
And how would you want, how can we learn from history? Because you've done some amazing episodes. You've showed the horrors, the distraction, etc. in your videos, but also the humorous parts, the human connection. But for the likes of your son who's growing up, my nephews, etc., how can we make sure that we learn from history so we don't keep repeating the same mistakes? How can we educate people? How would you like to see, apart from just playing your videos in schools, etc., which I think would be a great idea, but how could we learn from history so we actually have a better future and we don't keep repeating these horrible mistakes we seem to make every couple of generations?
I think it's really important for people who are interested in history to learn that it's complicated. Things aren't black and white. Things are really straightforward. Most of the people that you will learn about as an idyllic hero or an awful villain, generally speaking, it doesn't work quite like that. There's so much more nuance to these things. Many of the stories that you will hear, and the things that you will be brought up on as, perhaps like the key fact about the Great Fire of London, or the key fact about this battle, when you kind of dig into it, often they are a little more than myths or half truths. And I think it's really important once people kind of get to know that, they can see that taking one sort of one side or one sort of one narrative that really tries to simplify things, that can be quite a sort of problematic route to go down, because you can end up convincing people of something without them having the tools to question it.
There's so many rabbit holes I want to go down and ask questions about particular episodes, so I've got to have you back on, and we've got to do that more. But if you had a magic wand now, you could wave it, take away all the resources, issues, take away all the leadership, you could just dictate the video on a particular time, a particular person, a particular battle, whatever it was. What would be the dream video for you? Because obviously the evolution of your brand is to do this full time, but what would be the video that makes you just go, that's it, that's my dream to put to camera?
That's a really good question. I think there's probably quite a few. I think
it's like a kid in a candy shop, isn't it? It's like a bit of this, bit of this.
There are some episodes that we just won't ever be able to do. Recreating like the Battle of Trafalgar, when you have dozens of ships with 80 cannons, thousands of men on either side. Those kind of age of sail battles. That is something that we today will never be able to sort of see or recreate other than through special effects. I'm trying to think. There are so many. I mean, I suppose one thing that we should do, and one thing that I think we perhaps unfairly get criticised for, with only being a year into the channel, is the fact that it is quite British focused, or at least European focused. That is simply the fact that we don't really have the budget or the opportunity to travel. But I think there are hundreds of stories out there that would be very interesting to tell. And so I think an ambition of the channel would certainly be to expose and tell some of those lesser known stories at some point.
Because I think it's scary that you're only a year in and you've made such a success. It's a juggernaut of a channel, and it is honestly one of my favourite shows. And it's like we were saying earlier, like I know it's going to be bigger and better, and there's so many amazing stories that you could get your teeth into, and I can't wait to see what you do. And there's so many questions I've still got about your own personal opinions on this and that, so I'd love to do another one, but I know we're tight for time. But what would you want people to take from this? Say if there was a summary or a kind of understanding about history or just in life, what's this whole creation of a channel, history, studying and all that taught you? And what do you want people to remember from this?
So I guess I had a passion from when I was very young. And after university, after studying it, I imagined that passion would be essentially left at the door beyond me reading books and being a consumer, as you mentioned at the start. And it was simply the fact that I had a small window of opportunity that led to so much else, so many other things that have happened, and just by kind of opening that door when the kind of opportunity came around and knocking on it has really kind of transformed my life, and also transformed my life from a position where things seemed like they weren't going so well. So I suppose, my message is, don't forget what your passion is. Remember it, and don't give up on the idea that doing something that you really love can actually work for you, be part of your career, and be part of your success story.
I love that. I love that message. And I mean, I was surprised that when I went in, there was not like a website and merch, and because there's so much potential with your show. And I know you're only a year in, and you can do amazing things. But how can people follow this journey? How can we, before we start seeing you doing the David Attenborough style shows, and you're everywhere, which you should be, because it is amazing you do. How can we follow this journey, and before the books and the TED Talks and all that sort of stuff? How can we follow you and find you on social media and just watch the show?
So at this point, I think searching Survive History on YouTube, trying out an episode, I suppose what's good about the channel is if you like one episode, there's a very good chance you're going to like the rest, because the format is quite similar. They just sort of take you to a different point in time. So following Survive History, engaging with us, asking us a question. We try and give people quizzes and polls and things in the community area. I personally love the comments. There are some comments that really make my day. So, for example, we've had people say to me that they have shown it in schools, for example, which really, really sort of means a lot. So I think, have a look at the channel, send us a comment, ask us a question, and watch this space.
Well, that's it for another week, and thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.